Great. Well, ladies and gentlemen, here we have the second presentation from this morning, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce Finbar O'Mahony to you. Now, Finbar has a wonderful career that spans psychology, business IT, and a variety of other accomplishments. But for the last couple of years, he's been, well, for quite some years, you've been working on the O'Mahony project, and you are not only a member of the O'Mahony Society, councillor of the O'Mahony Society, and Finbar, in his own inimitable way, has taken DNA, applied it to the O'Mahony surname project, and put his own particular spin on the interpretation of the data. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce you to Dr. Finbar O'Mahony.
Good morning, good afternoon. Finbar.
I'm going to adjust this just slightly because I'm just getting a little bit of feedback. I'll try that. Okay.
Right, so I'm Finbar. There's the old story that there are three speeches. There's the one you write, there's the one you give, and then there's the really great one you give on the way home in the car to yourself, right? I've been working on this for 3 months, and then you know what they say. If you want a politician to speak for 2 hours, he'll do it immediately. If you want him to speak for 5 minutes, you need to give him 3 months' notice. I've had a 3 months' notice, but I've agonized. So I'm glad you're here. It's a privilege to speak to an audience of any number because I spent 30 years lecturing. I'm a bit out of practice, but I want to thank Morris for the invitation. I'll tell you a little bit about myself. Morris already said it. Why am I interested in genealogy, first of all, and genetic genealogy, secondly? The first talk that I ever attended on the O'Mahony family was in the 1950s. It was in the Ag Science Theatre at University College Cork. I was only 15, so that tells you how old I am. And it was a fascinating talk. And during the lecture, the presenter said, "I'm amazed that we do not have a band here this evening." And the reason he mentioned that was just next to the ad for the lecture, there was also an ad for a dance, and the band were the O'Mahony Ceilidh band. And sitting in front of him at that point was more than 60% of the band. My father, my brother, and myself. So the point about that is 1957 was the year that stimulated my interest in the O'Mahony family name. And shortly thereafter, we started attending the family clan gatherings. And into the 70s, I brought my children with me to some of the clan gatherings, in particular to the one in Kenmare. Now, the other point about it is that it's amazing these sort of pieces of serendipity you become aware of as well. Catherine mentioned the Azores. I've got DNA matches in Ourense and Galicia in the north of Spain and Portugal, and I also have DNA matches in the Azores. So when we talk, as we will this morning or this afternoon quickly, I will, about aspects of DNA testing, it's important to realize that I did not become involved in this to find out whether I was descended from Cian, the alleged progenitor of the O'Mahonys. I'm more interested in just finding out about the Irish Onut tribes. Much more interesting, much more important, and names may be important, but they're not everything. And just as the advice in the pursuit of Scarface, Al Capone was follow the money, in this study, basically, follow the DNA rather than the name. That is my motto. And I'll explain a little bit about that as we go on. Before I get really into the the heart of the matter. Can I give a little health warning here? Do you know the ads you have for loans from banks, and they speak very quickly at the end where they say the value of your investments may go up as well as go down? I'll just have to give the little health warning here. I am a member of the O'Mahony Society, I'm a member of the O'Mahony Council, yes, but the views that I express here are my own. Otherwise I could get into trouble. They're most decidedly my own views. Secondly, I couldn't possibly talk about the O'Mahonys without mentioning a name that just came up here earlier, and that was the late, great Owen O'Mahony. Back in the 50s, I could not fail to identify one voice very quickly on the radio, and that was the voice of Owen O'Mahony, the Pope. We tend not to mention him too much these days, but he was almost the author of the Irish heritage industry because of his programme, Meet the Clans. Let's remember him today that he was the individual who popularised the study of each of the clans. And that radio programme or Radio Erin, as we used to call it back then, was an exceptionally useful programme for genealogists and for the Irish people in general. It gave us a sense of pride. Now, the other point is another Trojan figure in the Irish societies in general, and the O'Mahonys in particular, was Peter Tynan O'Mahony. Now, Peter Tynan again took over the responsibility for the organisation of the clan gatherings and popularised them. And Owen O'Mahony, Peter O'Mahony, between them, we had Yves Count O'Mahony visiting from France with his family back in the 50s and 60s. And in Skull in the recent times, I've had the pleasure of meeting his daughter, her husband, and some of the other members of the family. They still come to Ireland. So we heard reference to the wine geese, but we also have others who went to the continent. The O'Mahonys were among them, and they fought in the armies of Spain and France. So again, the O'Mahonys played their part there. Now the current, I suppose it's ironic in a way, but reflective of the times, that the Taoiseach and Tánaiste of the O'Mahony sept at present are both women. Jean Dinwiddie, whose mother was an O'Mahony, she's the Taoiseach of the clan, and Nora Hickey is the Tánaiste. Nora Hickey, it's important to give her a little bit of credit to a lot of credit. She's chairperson, still I believe, of the Clans of Ireland, but she has also been editor of the O'Mahony Journal for many years. I'm not here selling anything. That's another good point. I'm not selling you genealogical services. I'm not selling you any research facilities. I'm just an enthusiast. I became interested in testing in genealogy way back, as recently as the date of my retirement. So I'm not an ancient expert at it. Now, Catherine mentioned the possibility of getting DNA from stamps. There's an exhibition going on at present called Stampa, and for years, 10 years, I was involved with the running of that exhibition, and for 3 years I was the chairman of the National Stamp Exhibition. I got so immersed in and engrossed in genetic genealogy and genealogy in general that I was unaware that the exhibition was on. I'd only discovered it by accident. So for me, genetic genealogy is the search not for, as I said, or tracing our roots back to kings or princes, but it is a fascinating study of the interrelationships between the different septs and the different clans within septs or families within septs. That's the key for me. Now, I'm currently administrator of the O'Mahony DNA project. I started the Moriarty project, the Moriarty Y-DNA project, and the Hartnett project, I suppose out of respect for and in memory of my grandparents on the maternal side. Dan Moriarty, my grandfather, and Lizzie Hartnett, my grandmother. So when I look at the O'Mahonys For me, it's a broader study. I'm looking at the family, my family in particular, rather than just the patriarchal line. So, right, we'll start from here. So, O'Mahony's on the left there, your right, you'll see the O'Mahony arms. That's for one person, for one branch of the family. At the bottom, which is blank at present, you have what I describe as the space for the war cry of the O'Mahonys. Before we were all as literate as we are today, if you were in battle, you identified with the banner under which you fought, and you followed the war cry of the individual who brought you into battle. Ours was Losser Roin Gobua. And here we have it. Losser Roin Gobua, light or path to victory. So it's a romantic notion, but it gives you an idea of the background to what bound people together. The banner, the symbols, the signs that we stood under, and the war cry or the battle cry that you followed. I'm going to talk to you about a little bit about the O'Mahony Society, the O'Mahony Sept, and then the O'Mahony Y-DNA project, the results which we've got, and then my hopes for the future. By the time I get to section 3, one lady last night said to me, I hope you're not going to be talking about B-52s as well. You know what the B-52s are, the B-52 bombers. But many of the lectures have been fairly heavy on the haplogroups and haplotypes. I'll try and minimize that, not because of total ignorance or lack of familiarity, but it can be rather tiring to wade through each of the haplotypes and the differences between them. It's important we talk about it. And out of courtesy to one gentleman who lives in Athlone, his first name is Aidan, I'm going to mention haplogroup I. We have 2 members of the O'Mahony Y-DNA project. I can see Michael O'Reilly Rice laughing. He knows the implications behind that remark. Yeah, we have 2 members of the O'Mahony project who are haplogroup I. And I'll say very few words about that, but I will, as I have just now, mention them as well. So we'll move on. The O'Mahony Society has its own arms there, and on the other side we see the Y-DNA project. That little emblem and, I suppose, brand was designed by Susan Beretta. Some of you are probably familiar with Susan's work on the internet, and Susan has Collins and O'Mahony links through West Cork, so she very kindly did this for us. A bit of the project background. The O'Mahony Surname Project was begun in August 2003 by Perry Streeter. This is another important point. It's important that we approach research with an open mind and be willing to accept what we find rather than to set out to find what we want to find. That is nothing more than an indication that the starting point for the Society's Y-DNA project was to find a link between the O'Mahonys of the North Cork and Colonel Sean O'Mahony, the Fenian, because that cluster of O'Mahonys had familial links to Sean O'Mahony. The project was then handed over to the O'Mahony Society in 2007, and we have used, since the beginning, Family Tree DNA, whose stand is down below stairs, and you've heard many of the representatives on the platforms up to this referring to the DNA projects in Family Tree DNA. I tested with Family Tree DNA back around 2007, 2008. And like most people, I started at 37 markers. I'm an enthusiast, as I said, so the minute I started getting results back in, I started contacting every one of my matches and greeting them as if they were long-lost second cousins. It doesn't happen that way. Before long, I extended the number of markers to 67. Shortly thereafter, I tested at the deep clade level. Then I found myself upgrading to 111 markers, and I've continued. I also went for the autosomal DNA family tree, DNA family finder, and I also tested my mitochondrial DNA. So like the majority of men in Ireland, I'm R1b2. I now can be described as RL21. But my mitochondrial DNA is H6A1A. Why I'm interested in the broader range of DNA testing is that 50% of our ancestors we tend to, not so much to ignore, but to forget about to a certain degree because the lack of ability to find out who they are. But the H6A1A mitochondrial DNA is about 30,000 years old. It's supposed to have originated way back near the Black Sea, and it is yet one of the most common types of mitochondrial DNA in Ireland. Now, I'm so pleased that Catherine preceded me in these talks because H6A1A is interesting as well, and its association with that area, because one of the reasons or possible explanations for the Jewish connection in some of the matches that you get is the percentage of Ashkenazi Jews. The Ashkenazis came from around that area, and some of you are familiar with the story. The king wanted to unify the country. There was just a multi-denominational country at the time. There was a certain degree of strife between them, and he wanted to opt for one religion. The Jewish faith won, and they became Jews, and that's where the Ashkenazis are supposed to have come from. So H6A1A predates any one of the monotheistic religions. I've lost some Facebook friends over that statement. That is in no way an anti-Semitic comment. I do not wish to offend or upset anybody here, but we have to realize that DNA predates the monotheistic religions. Yeah? So that's that one out of the way, and that's why I gave the health warning at the beginning. Now, if we move on rapidly. Our objectives are similar to everybody else's in the O'Mahony Society. We wanted to identify how many different lines of the family originated in Ireland. We wanted to determine whether or not people who emigrated from Ireland to various countries were actually related to one another. And then thirdly, we wanted to enable any living O'Mahony to find his roots back here. So we're looking for as many participants as possible. The variety of the crest here that you see, that's from the breastplate of Count James Joseph O'Mahony, who was a French count. Now, part two, I'll talk a little bit about the sect itself, the O'Mahonys. They're mainly from Cork and Kerry, but you'll find them in Limerick, Tipperary and Waterford. Any O'Mahonys here? Good. We'll have a chat afterwards. If you've tested, great. If you haven't, I'll get you.
That's why I'm wrong.
Good. You won't escape. Right, so we say a few words about the origins of the O'Mahonys. The O'Mahonys are the O'Mahuna Oscoilga. They descend from Mahun, or Mahan, and he was the son of Cian, who was Cian Moch Muelmua. Muelmua, we forget about him. That's an important point. There are those who thought, that life for O'Mahonys began with Cian or with Mahan. The DNA predated Cian, Mahan, and Muelmua. So let's not lose sight of that. That's what the DNA project is all about. Can I just interject here that it is amazing that not only do I match O'Mahonys, but my DNA matches the DNA of the Hartnetts and the Moriartys. So there's a broad link between the tribes of Munster and the Onuk tribes, in particular those branches that we associate with one another as being closely related. Mahon became Prince of Rathlin, not the island up off the north coast. It's near Garans, about 7 miles, near Temple Martin, 7 miles north of Bandon. Now, that was a sacred site not just for the O'Mahonys, it was for the Onuk tribe. And then my good friend, who isn't here today, Elizabeth O'Donoghue Ross, the O'Donoghus, the O'Mahonys, the O'Sullivans, they would have been using that particular site, right? Then the family broke up, the wider family, and they went their separate ways. Okay? So Muitri Vahuna, that's the International Association of the Society, and their website is an amazing source of information. They're at www.o'mahanysociety.org. I recommend it to you. And some of the material I'm going to put up here now is already on that site. Now back to the diversity within the clan. If you look at this is a map which appeared in an early publication of the Society. It was prepared by one of my old professors, gladly still with us, Untitled O'Mahony, who wrote his book on economics in Ireland, the Irish economy, way back in the late 50s. And this map is exclusively associated with the parishes in the Diocese of Cork. You'll notice there's a blank area down there with the word Ross written in it. So it's not even dealing with the O'Mahonys of the Diocese of Ross, and it's not dealing with the Diocese of Cloyne, and it certainly is not dealing with the Diocese of Kerry. And you know that the Diocese of Kerry extends into part of Cork. So you have a complication there. Look at the variety, as we will very briefly, of the O'Mahonys even within the Diocese of Cork. Now you see the names up here. I've just broken them out into a little spreadsheet or tabular form. So Mahon succeeded his father Cian as King of the Nine Territories, or Prince of Ivaha. He probably lived at Rathlin near Garans, as I said, 6 miles north of Temple Martin. And the branches that are purported to have descended from him are as follows. I'm not going to go through them blow by blow, but you'll see that there's a wide variety. O'Mahony Fionn, the Shluch Taig as a subset of those, and that's interesting because Taig, Timothy is a popular name in certain branches of the O'Mahony family. My own third great grandfather was a Timothy Mahony, but he was not from West Cork. He might have been originally, but one branch or two branches of the O'Mahony family stemmed from a dispute over a will way back in the 14th century, 13th century in Rossbryn. Finn died. He left so many ploughlands to each of his two sons. The older brother got the castle. One of the castles was supposed to go to the two brothers. The will was not honoured, and one brother left in high dudgeon and went to Kerry, and the other left and went to Cork. Now it would be beautiful to think that, therefore, because my great-great-great-grandfather was called Timothy, I'm descended from. It doesn't quite work like that. The next we have Shluch Diarmida, and they were associated with the areas, and still are associated with the areas of Court, MacSherry, Butlerstown, and so on. Shluch Kilnaglura, the Kilnaglory branch. Now, they're hard to find these days, but Kilnaglory is a parish, still is a parish, and it's just in Ballincollig, about 6 miles, 7 miles outside Cork. But the parish is reasonably extensive, and they're associated with that area. It would be lovely to think that all you have to do, therefore, is to go to Ballincollig and you'll find the Kilnaglory branch of the O'Mahonys. Not as easy as that, because as you know now, Ballincollig is a major suburb of Cork City and has been swamped with O'Mahonys who've moved in.
10 minutes, Finbar?
10 minutes? Okay. The growth of the project. We're on to the interesting bit. The project sorry. The growth of the project. 2003, the 10 years have shown a dramatic growth. The growth is reflective of the level of interest in the project, in DNA testing itself, and in the reduction in the prices. So I don't claim credit for that growth, but I'm glad to see that it has grown from 33 up to 130. DNA, Family Tree DNA very kindly give you a breakdown of the different groups within the project. As you can see, quite a number of our membership have tested at the deep clade level and have confirmed their haplogroups. So here we have R1B1 and so on. Okay. And in the predicted side, the members who haven't tested at the deep clade level have been matched against those who have, and we say that this is the percentage breakdown of the membership of the project at present. I'll move on quickly. If we look at the spreadsheet or the breakdown of the membership then by result, we will see that they fall into a rather large cluster, 83% South Irish type 2. And then there are minority representations below that, some of them sizable. On that chart, I have a corrected version of that which says Dalcashian Irish type, Dalcashian/Irish type 3. This is the North Cork branch that I referred to earlier on, up around Kilbehany, from Kilbehany across into Clare, from Kilbehany into South Tipperary and then across into Waterford. So there's a swathe across that part of the country that is associated with the O'Mahonys. They're called O'Mahonys, and they share a common ancestor, yes, but a remote common ancestor. The majority, 83% or 83 members who are South Irish type 2. There is a diversity within it, but again, a common ancestor. The exceptions, I2A and I2B1. Interesting, but there's an old rule that says your Pareto analysis, it tells us that we spend 80% of our time talking about 20% of the cases. The Americans talk about ABC analysis. Now, I'm not going to spend 80% of my time left talking about the I types, but it's important to realize that many of the clans or sects in the south of Ireland have I type representation. The suggestion is that there are possibly residual elements of the early occupants of the southern coast who were attracted by the mining in Mount Gabriel, just above Scull, and further west. There are many reasons why they could be there, but they could equally have been brought to us as part of the slave trade in Dublin, and the Vikings were also in Cork. How they got there, we don't know. The fact is that they are, and they were absorbed into the clan. Right, so we see that R1B, Cork, Kerry and Limerick, 81. We have one E member, 2 I members. The results spreadsheet, again, you've seen this a number of times if you've attended the various sessions, and helpfully, we've got a breakdown here which shows you, highlighted in color, the variations that occur in the haplotypes. Can I just move on quickly to show you how we can use the spreadsheet? Here is one cluster that appears to be very closely related. This is the group that I was thrilled to greet as my long-lost cousins, and on the face of it, they all appear to be exceptionally similar. First of all, The numbers are there, but all the names are O'Mahony. It's very, very reassuring. However, there's another technique that I used based on a suggestion made by Morris at a lecture I attended. I applied the technique. In experimental psychology, we used to call it the method of paired comparisons. Family tree DNA gives you an estimate of the genetic difference between pairs of results. So you get your genetic distance, and on this I took the group I just showed you and I plotted their genetic distances. Now this is at the 37 marker match level. 37 markers, and here you see clusters of 100% certainty, that is as close to certainty as you can get, that they shared a common ancestor in the last 27 generations. Right? Bearing in mind what Dan Bradley said about the estimates have to be given rather wide scope, we're talking there about, let's say, 4 generations or 25 years for a generation as an estimate. Divide that by 4, 600 years, add another 200 to 300 years. We're talking about going back to a common ancestor for the closest of those to the year 1000. That doesn't mean the others are not related or even closely related, but the common ancestor goes back before the year 1000. So we come from a common branch of the clan and precede the date of the adoption of surnames. Now, I'll be finishing 2 minutes, 3 minutes. The deeper levels of testing, I went along and I tested not only at the 111 marker level, I've also tested more recently with the Full Genome Corporation, which was started by Justin Allen Lowe. I thought I would have the results for this, and following on from what Catherine said about the use of STRs versus SNPs, the number of SNPs that have been found in the early results coming back from those who tested in the batch or two ahead of me in the Full Genome Corporation would certainly lend a lot of weight to the argument that we are teasing out in DNA testing the situation to the point where, yes, you can test and the SNPs will identify you much more closely with territorial areas or countries and regions of origin. It was in December of last year that I joined the Genome 2 project, and those results were uploaded to Family Tree DNA. I uploaded them in December, and in that batch, my results came back and they had discovered CTS 4466, this new SNP. Joe Carroll had been tested before me. He equally had CTS 4466 plus. 15 examples, including McCarthy's, O'Donoghue's, O'Sullivan's, had been identified shortly thereafter. We're now up to about 7 or 8 people who have tested, and the preponderance of those results are associated with men who have Onupt surnames or South Irish surnames. So everybody is jumping up and down with delight, and so we've identified the South Irish marker. I suggest that we be a little bit more cautious. We know that people with the name or names associated with the South Irish bear that marker. It would be premature, in my view, to say it is the South Irish marker. It's getting there, we're getting closer to it, and hopefully with the Full Genome Project, or the Full Genome Corporation's test, the full wide genome, we might very well arrive at that point, but I urge caution, and I suggest to you that you mightn't have to hold your breath too long, but it would be wise to be a bit cautious. Can I just talk briefly then? 1 minute. This is the map which shows the distribution of the members of the project who've been able to pinpoint a region for their of origin for their ancestors, say 200 or 150 years ago. I have the interactive link up there, and were the internet able to give us full access, I could highlight each one of those and show you who they are and a few more details about them. If you see, there are a number of different colors. So we have the Atlantic modal haplogroup. So, the base root from which the South Irish would have stemmed. And then you have here my own particular great-great-great-grandfather, Timothy or Tyig O'Mahony. He found himself in Killarney. But the argument is, if you notice the spread of results here, 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 here. So it's within a triangle from Killarney to Mallow and from Mallow to Bandon. So I would describe that as a heartland of one cluster of O'Mahonys. Here, the ones in grey, and there are many more examples, but they haven't been able to pinpoint the townland of their ancestor. Those are the group that I refer to as the North Cork O'Mahonys. They could equally be called the Clare, Tipperary, or Waterford O'Mahonys, but those are the Irish type 3. And so it goes. You will notice, though, they're confined almost exclusively. In fact, they are confined exclusively to Munster. So it's useful to look at that technique to establish the different branches of the clan and see then if we can relate that back to the chart that I showed you of the parishes of, or the O'Mahonys within the parishes in the Diocese of Cork. So the final question is then for me to ask, why so much diversity in the clan? Another minute. We're used to hearing about NPEs, non-paternity events. That does not mean that the O'Mahonys were particularly amorous, beyond their associations with their own wives. But we do have adoptions, we accept that as well. But there are other considerations as well. The Brehon laws played a part. The suggestion was, if you killed a man, you were responsible for rearing his kids. And outside of war. But even in war, you took on responsibilities. There were other considerations as well. And that was in the area, if either partner in the marriage is infertile, there is evidence that Irish law permitted the other to acquire a child elsewhere, is the way in which it's written. What we mean is have a child by another woman. Okay? If the woman is infertile, the man could go off, have a child with another woman, and the child would be reared as his. But it also worked the other way around. You see, if you had a child with another woman, that child still carried your male DNA, your Y DNA if it was a male. But the other way worked too. If you could not perform or you were infertile, the wife could have a child, and he was reared as your son, and you bore the responsibility for it, but the child didn't have your Y DNA. So there are a whole range of possible reasons why we would have name variety in the clan. There are other medical ones, which we need not go into here, but this is from the Irish Journal of Medical Science. So, hopes for the future. I hope not only do we capture you, but I hope we capture many, many more, because basically we need quite a significant increase in the number in all Irish surname projects. All Irish surname projects. We are probably very active in terms of participation, but a sample of one, a self-selecting, non-stratified sample, is no basis for making scientific deduction. And if we are really going to get to grips with this, we need a wide sample, a random sample of O'Mahonys, and hopefully as many as 1,000 minimum in each of the projects, if we are to draw any reasonable conclusions about Y-DNA. Okay? I could go on for much longer, and as you realize, I probably could talk for too much longer, so I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Finbar. Thank you very much for that presentation. I think it's absolutely fantastic to see how Y-DNA is actually beginning to link up with the ancient medieval genealogies and how it's really helping us tease out what the genetic signatures of clans are. And I think you have done fantastic work on the O'Mahony side. So I really praise you for that. Now, I'm sure there's going to be questions. Anybody have any questions? Yeah, we have one lady here.
Very interesting talk, thank you very much. I wonder, could you just go over the chart you had when you were matching up, you had the X's where the...
Oh, yes.
And I didn't quite follow how that was interpreted.
Sorry, yeah. Sorry, that's it. Now, as I said, this is a technique that Morris basically suggested at one of the lectures I attended in the National Library. It's an old technique of paired comparisons. So within my group in the results sheet, the spreadsheet from Family Tree DNA, we have 9 different groups within the O'Mahony project who match one another but are not that closely matched to each of the other groups. So I just chose for convenience the group that match me or that I fit into. So here we have the names along. I've kept them reasonably anonymous. You have Brian, Thomas, James, Daniel, Greg, Kevin, Finbar, Finbar, myself, and Michael, Patrick, Martin, Joseph, George, and Cornelius. So we have their kit numbers across the top and kit numbers down the side. So you can actually ignore the bottom half of the chart. The dividing line there in yellow, now if you just look at one side or the other, you match each of the pairs. And you take the number, the percentage shown, say in Family Tree DNA. If I want to look at kit number 155017 and match him against each of the others in the group, and then put in the percentage of possibility or probability that they share a common ancestor in 27 generations. Okay? So 155017 has a 70.1% probability of sharing a common ancestor in 27 generations with 16540. Go along to the next one. It has an 81% 0.29 of sharing it with 118466 and so on. If you go down here, 8090 and 18466 and 97.1. The ones who have 100, okay, so 193092 and 88090 are 100% likelihood that they share the common ancestor in 27 generations.
Why do you have the 27 generations?
That is the limit up to which Family Tree DNA gives you the degree of certainty. There's another important point that follows on from that, though. They do allow you to change it to 67 markers and 111 markers, and all that ecstasy I felt because they matched me at 37 marker level would disappear by the time you get to 67, and by the time I go up to 111, the 2 people I match are called O'Reilly. But they match me very closely at 103 and 106 or 108 markers at the 1 level.
So how many generations back does that go then?
Oh, it's not the generation, it's the other way around. It's the degree of proximity in terms of how many markers of a difference is how you would calculate it. The results from Family Tree DNA would indicate what level of percentage of certainty there was that you shared a common ancestor in 27 generations. So if you even kept it at the 27 generations and go up to 111 markers, then you get the degree of distance. So the greater the level of difference that will creep in as you increase the number of markers. Yeah? So yeah, we share a common ancestor. I'm fascinated to find out. I suspect, and I've put it up on one of the other presentations, that the O'Reillys stemmed from a family that shared a common bond with the O'Mahonys near Poulagory and Sheens and Derrycunnahy outside the lakes of Killarney, because the O'Reillys lived there in the 1700s, the O'Mahonys lived there in the 1700s, and it's back to one of these possibilities of an O'Mahony child being reared as an O'Reilly. Okay. Now you have the varieties of the name O'Reilly. Now there's a gentleman in Dublin City University who runs the O'Reilly project. He would object strongly to suggesting any links between the O'Mahonys and the O'Reillys. But there are the O'Mahony Ragaluk. Now he was a brother of one of the founders of the clan, and there were those who were known as the O'Mahony Ragaluk. And then they became the Reynolds O'Reillys, the southern branches or versions. That was anglicised as names that are found in other parts of the country. So it's not that they are O'Reillys, because the O'Reillys have different Y-DNA from the O'Mahonys or the McCarthy's or the O'Donoghans. So if you've got my DNA, the odds are you're from my part of the country. Yeah? Is that okay? Anybody else?
Any other questions?
Oh,
Can I just add to that?
Yes.
Just in case nobody's anybody's still a bit confused. Those percentages are available when you join FTDNA with a Y sample, Y test. Those percentages appear on your home page. They're available to you. The percentage you match to anybody else. You can feed that information. So it's data from the FTDNA database, and it's in your personal data, your close matches and how close they are. And that's where those numbers are actually coming from. I think Finbar did say that, but it's make sure you understand
Can
that.
I ask a question after that? Now, I apologise because this isn't, well, as far as I know at the moment, because I only tested a couple of days ago, but I don't think I have any Munster connections, but that remains to be proven. One of the questions, I suppose, one of the reasons I tested, I mean, I do have the wider sort of perspective, but one of them is sort of people of my name who emigrated to the US 150, 160 years ago. I'm in touch with them. So, I mean, what is the level of Y-DNA testing I would have to do to make sure that he wasn't related to me 27 generations ago, but rather sort of 7, 8 generations ago?
Well, I suppose you've started off with a 37 marker test, and that's a very good place to start. And I think you'll get, to give you an idea, with my testing, at 12 markers I have 6,000 matches. At 25 markers it goes down to, I think it is around about 50 or 60. At 37 markers it goes down to 7. And within that 7 there are 3 Gleasons. 2 people have kept their surname private, so I don't know who they are. And then there's 4 other people with different surnames. And then if I go up to 67, then it comes down to 1 Gleason and 1 other person. And at 111 I don't have any close matches at all. So I think you're very, very wise to just stick with 37 for now, see what you get, and definitely join your surname project. Have you joined their surname?
Which project, I think, and I want to talk to you as well, Maurice, about your Caribbean project, because people of my name appear to have been going to North America for a long, long time. And there's an awful lot of different variations in the spelling of the name. Some of them may have gone from Waterford, some of them may have gone from sort of North Kerry, West Limerick, and the like. So it'd be very interesting to find out.
Can I just say more on that?
Oh, no, you're
Oh, still might. Just very interesting point, because O'Mahony's from the West Cork area would have found their way to places like Virginia. Lord Baltimore got a land grant from King Charles for his good services.
We may have a connection with George Colbert, yes.
Yeah, and as a result, we have Mahonys, M-H-A-N-Y, Marneys, Mahorneys. Many of them would have been either indentured servants or whatever in the West Indies and in the early colonies. And they are certainly matched with us in terms of DNA. Some of them are African American at this stage. So you have a mixture in terms of their connections, but the DNA would link them back to West Cork. So it's important, and that's why I gladly suggested I would sponsor a kid or two for Morris's ICARA project, because it is important we bring people home, at least emotionally, and maintain the link. There's no point in talking a good line. You have to walk the walk, not just talk the talk. Okay.
Absolutely. Does that answer most of your questions? Great. Any other questions? Can I just ask what part of the country? West Limerick?
Newcastle West.
Newcastle West.
Yeah.
Oh, right, okay.
I know really are.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think that's probably a suitable point to leave you in the capable hands of Finbar. We will come down on scrape his cheeks.
Yeah, I'll do that.
Ladies and gentlemen, can we please give a warm thank you to Finbar O'Mahony. It was absolutely fine. Well done. I recorded everything.
Well, you
so-
can delete 90% of it.